When India first drafted its constitution, the document laid the groundwork for the largest democracy on earth, but it initially left a gaping hole at the very base of the country's power structure. It made no mention of local village councils. This omission directly contradicted the vision of Mahatma Gandhi. He viewed Gram Swaraja, independent village self-rule, as the absolute requirement for a newly independent India. But the Constitution's chief architect, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, violently opposed this idea. Drawing on his own background, Ambedkar knew that rural Indian villages were sharply divided by caste and class. He argued that handing over legal authority to these small self-governing units would simply give local elites and upper castes the legal tools they needed to continue exploiting marginalized communities. This highlights a core tension in governance, the difference between law and justice. Law is backed by the coercive force of the state. Justice requires fairness. And simply applying a standardized, democratic law to a deeply unfair, entrenched social hierarchy wouldn't automatically produce justice. For decades, the system tried forcing that fairness from the top down. The Supreme Court repeatedly expanded the right to life under Article 21, ruling that mere animal existence wasn't enough. They mandated that a life of quality must include livelihood, primary health care, and shelter. But sweeping rulings from the nation's highest court could only reach so far into rural life. To actually achieve fairness, the Constitution needed a totally new mechanism to bypass that entrenched social hierarchy from the bottom up. That mechanism finally arrived in 1992 with the 73rd Constitutional Amendment. Its goal was to force democratic governance directly down to the village level. The amendment established a strict three-tier system. At the base of this pyramid sits the Gram Sabha, which consists of the entire voting age population of a village. This general body is responsible for electing the local government above them. To prevent local elites from establishing permanent control, the law implemented its first systemic hack. Elections for these local bodies became strictly mandatory every 5 years. The most radical safeguard was demographic. The amendment mandated reserved seats for scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and guaranteed that 33% of all elected offices went to women. These quotas mathematically forced historically silenced groups into positions of actual authority. For the first time, Dalit and tribal members weren't just present. They were the ones signing the checks and directing local resources, directly answering Ambedkar's fear of elite capture. On paper, it worked. Take the story of Kalawati, a Dalit woman who stood for Panchayat elections. Before winning, she was only known relative to her family, as Ramu's mother or Hiralal's wife. Becoming an elected Panchayat member gave her a distinct identity, a name of her own, and independent self-esteem in her community. Across the country, empowered women began using this authority to solve hyper-local problems. In Uttarakhand, women established Van Panchayats, forest councils, where members actively nurture tree saplings and police the slopes to protect their local forests from illegal felling. However, passing a constitutional amendment does not instantly erase centuries of ingrained social behavior. Today, a small coterie of rich landlords from upper castes or the landed peasantry often control Gram Sabha meetings from the shadows, making allocation decisions while the silent majority watches. And in some areas, like the traditional tribal institutions of Meghalaya, historical systems that predate the amendment continue to actively exclude women from participating. The legal framework for grassroots equality exists, but the on-the-ground reality is that elite dominance in the village is still an active daily threat. So what recourse do marginalized citizens have when their local elite successfully hijack the Gram Sabha? When the formal, localized channels break down, citizens bypass them through a broader ecosystem of democratic voice, using the Constitution's foundational guarantees to create pressure from outside. Workers who find themselves ignored by local authorities organize through trade unions like CITU. They use Article 19, the right to freedom of speech and expression, to organize massive protests, forcing the state to interpret principles like equal pay for equal work as a legal requirement rather than a distant ideal. Meanwhile, massive agricultural alliances like the Kisan Ekta Morcha operate on a macro scale. Every February, these interest groups use the formal budget process defined by the Constitution to lobby the Finance Ministry directly, forcing national policy changes that the local village council could never achieve alone. These movements prove that the Constitution is a capacity builder. It provides the legal baseline of fairness that allows ordinary people to leverage the power of the state. By defining the basic norm of social justice, it gives citizens the tools they need to drag their society toward equality.